record on this computer. Oh, it's recording. Okay. Wrong button. Here we go. We now use, it takes up a picture of a morning, like at a funeral, because what's saying is it's like we're going to have a death. The first woe is mourning for greed and disregard for the law, which meant that the land couldn't be sold, but rather leased. And if you read in 1 Kings 21, and particularly in Leviticus 25:33, you realise that when Joshua came in and took the land was allocated to people, and people had a right to that land and to be able to farm it and use it and have food from it. But what happened over time, some greedy people disregarded that law, and they kind of took over the land, bit like Ahab taking over Naboth's vineyard and exploiting the land and building houses on the land. And if you build too much houses on the land, basically you've got less land to be able to grow stuff. What this first woe is, it says, woe to those who add house to house. Okay, what you're doing is, this is my house, I'm going to get the land of somebody else next door, and I'll add another house onto my estate and another house, and I'm going to build up my little mini kingdom, and I'm going to disenfranchise the weak and the poor, and I'll bring them to an underclass that no longer has land, no longer has right to the land and all the produce, and the best they can do is become poor labourers, which was foreign to the plan of God, and he's mourning for the greed of this expansionism. And what Yahweh is going to do, instead of all this accumulation, what's going to happen, he's going to bring judgment, so their houses are going to get ruined, taken over by invaders from Assyria and down into Judah. Well, Judah is going to have problems with Assyria, but first they're going to have problems with Damascus and well, actually Assyria will cause some trouble in parts of Judah. Won't be able to get Jerusalem, and neither will Israel and Damascus and the Edomites. They will cause real trouble and ruin houses in parts of Judah. Then what's going to happen is that the land's going to be desolated, agriculture fails, miserable returns, and he's going to turn all their greed and their wonderful kingdoms they've built up into a loss enterprise. That's going to be part of his judgment. And here's what it says. I'll bring that down. Yahweh Sabaoth has sworn this in my hearing, says the prophet. Many houses will be brought to ruin. Great and fine ones will be left untenanted, because people like the Assyrians are going to carry them off, particularly in the area of Israel, but also some cases in Judah. For 10 acres of a vineyard, you get 1 barrel. That's a pretty miserable return. And 10 bushels of seed will yield only 1 bushel. That's not good farming, is it? You want 1 bushel producing 10, the very reverse. And what he's saying is all these plans and all this greed is going to come to nothing. And he's mourning. He's mourning. And then there is the second woe. Mourning for drunken partying and a total lack of interest in serving Yahweh. Woe to those who get up early to go after strong drink and stay up late at night inflamed with wine. Drunk, just drunken party. Nothing but harp and lyre, tambourine and pipe. They're paying people to have music while they grog on and drink on with their drinking bouts. And in their drunken stupor, they're only thinking about their own selfish enjoyment, if you call being drunk all the time enjoyment. It might seem great at the time, but in the morning, you're going to have very bad headaches. Never a thought for the works of Yahweh. What a terrible situation. Wow. Never a glance for what his hands have done. No appreciation, not even a glance. They should be fully focused on the generosity of God, but they're too busy on their own selfish stuff. And they're actually destroying themselves. They're killing their brain cells. They're killing their livers. And what an empty way of life. And the Lord is mourning for his people. And we continue on with another woe. Oh, no, actually, Yahweh's judgment. He's going to exchange for humiliating death or starving, thirsty exiles. They're eating and drinking and partying, and they're going to be hungry and thirsty. Excuse me. Wow. And they're going to be going to exile. And Yahweh is then glorified and respected because of his judgment. And you've got young sheep finding pasture in land that had been overused by cattle. And cattle actually are ones that really use land a whole lot. They're really harder on the land than sheep and goats. And the Lord is mourning. Lord is actually judging for the land, not just the people. And then he says, that is why my people is in exile. Okay. And some of the people of Israel will go into exile in the early stages, I think at the end of Jotham's reign, for want of perception or lack of perception. Her dignitaries starving, her populace parched with thirst. No more drink, drink. That is why Sheol opens wide its throats. You know why the land is untenanted, places are untenanted? Because the people are dead and gapes with measureless jaws, and down go her noblemen and populace and loud revellers, merry to the last. What irony. Human nature have been humbled. Humankind brought lows, and the eyes of the proud have been humbled. And Yahweh Sebaot, the Lord of hosts, is more respected for his judgment, but not respected enough, I'll have to say, because they are not learning. God, the Holy One, has displayed his holiness by his justice. And now in the raised land, in their old pastures, the lambs will graze, and fields laid waste by fat cattle will feed the kids, the goats and the kids of goats. And so you've got baby goats and baby lambs feeding in the land. The third woe, mourning for those who work at sin and treacherous guilt and who mock God. Wow. Woe to those who drag along by reins of duplicity. These are people who are just untrustworthy. And it's a bit like, you know, taking real effort. They're pulling their carts along with ropes. and they're steering by treachery. They drag along sin as though with a cart. They're putting a lot of effort into this. To those to say, why doesn't he do his work quickly so we can see it? Why doesn't the Holy One of Israel Israel's design hurry up and come true so we can experience? Because it's all about us, and no respect there. And God is mourning at people who have just totally lost their way and how treacherous they've become. The fourth woe is it goes further than that. There's a breakdown of truth and integrity in society, and we know about that today. Woe to those who call what is bad good. Yep. We've got all woman's rights over her body, so we've got abortion on demand, and we've got people with a gay lifestyle. And all the damage that lifestyle does is called good, and people who are trying to warn them from a lifestyle which is ultimately damaging them are called haters. Isn't that the reverse of what's good, bad? And we've got the medication to kind of help with this COVID crisis. It's bad. Yep. And we'll wait for a vaccine. And we've got people substituting darkness for light, and light for darkness, bitter for sweet. It's a kind of reversal, and it's there today. And we've got media which is promoting stuff that is in line. And God mourns this breakdown of integrity in society today, just as he was mourning the breakdown of truth and integrity in the society of Israel, and Judah was going the same way. And the fifth woe is mourning for pride and spiritual blindness of the people. Woe to those who think themselves wise, because actually they're not, and believe themselves enlightened, but they're not. How do we know? Because of their lifestyle. We judge by the fruits. If the fruits are evil, there's something wrong with the tree. And God mourns. Isn't that something about the heart of God? He's mourning. Woe, woe. Mourning the sixth and last of the woes. Woe to those whose might lies in wine bibbing. Their heroism in mixing strong drink. I can drink longer drink than you. What kind of society who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deny justice to the upright? And that's supposed to be strength, not corruption, and a mourning for a lack of true heroism and corrupt injustice. And Yahweh's justice comes, utter devastation of the people for despising Yahweh and their rejecting of his words. And what does he say in verse 24? As the flame devours the stubble, the people of Israel and even the people of Judah now are becoming like dried stubble. We have problems with bushfire season because we've got people who are not allowed to clear away and burn it away properly. And so we get bushfires. When it comes, the flames come, there's plenty of stubble there and it burns. And what we've got here is the people are likened to stubble. They've lost the greenness. They've lost the greenness. They're not a green tree anymore. They're dried, withered up because of their sin. As the straw flares up and disappears in the flame, their root will be like decay. Wow. It's rotten from the root, is what he's saying. And their shoot is going to be carried off like dust. This is devastation. Why? Why has that happened? Because they rejected the law of Yahweh Sebaot. And they not only rejected his law, they despised the word of the Holy One of Israel, both the word through Moses and the word through the prophets that have prophesied beforehand, and the word of the Lord coming through the prophets in these days. This is why Yahweh's anger is blazed against his people, and he's raised a hand against them to strike them. Why the mountains have shuddered, why the corpses are lying like dung in the streets. And we come to a refrain which we're going to hear time and again in these next few chapters. After all this, is that Yahweh's anger is not spent. No, his hand is still raised. And why? Because after all this, they still haven't repented. They still haven't turned to the Lord. They are still not trusting in the Lord. It's still a remnant. Actually, it's a bigger remnant because there's an awful lot of people of non-remnant have been judged and filled up in Sheol, but it's still a minority. Alas, alas, alas. In this, in this judgment, it emphasizes that Yahweh will use a foreign nation to carry out the destruction he has determined. When we get to chapter 7, he will name Assyria as that nation. Actually, and he'd also, in chapter 7, he's going to name Israel, what's left of it, under the leadership of Syria, and coupled with some help from Edom, who are going to really try and subjugate Judah. You've got all that, where God has shifted from protector to instigator of trouble because of their sin. And so we finish in a moment chapter 5, and we'll do that, and then I'm going to stop and opportunity to share. In this, it's saying he hoists a signal for a distant nation. He whistles them up from the ends of the earth. So this is talking about Assyria. He's not talking about the local trouble with Israel and Syria and Edom. He's not talking about that. He's talking about distant nation. He's talking about Assyria. None of them tired. How fleet they come. They're coming in a long way, but they're not tired. Even though they've come a long way, none of them stumbling, none of them asleep or drowsy. And you mob Israel and Judah, you are asleep and drowsy. You are stumbling because of your sin. None of them with belt unfastened. None of you're unprepared for trouble because you're not turning to the Lord like you should. None of them with broken sandal strap. You're just not properly equipped. You could be equipped if you trusted in the Lord. Their arrows are sharpened. Their bows are strung. Their horses' hooves, you would think, were flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind. Their roar is like a lioness. Like fierce young lions, they roar, growling. They seize the prey and carry it off. This is exile talk, with no one to prevent it, because Yahweh is the one who is causing it. Growling at it that day, like the growling of the sea. Only look at the country, darkness and distress, and light turned to darkness by the clouds, and above all, by the failure of Israel and Judah to be people who are holy to the Lord, trusting in the Lord, repenting because of sin, and trying to follow him in obedience of faith, walking in light instead of darkness, walking in humility instead of pride, walking in integrity rather than corruption, and justice rather than injustice. But after the break where we pause, we're going to shift to the courts of heaven and the call of Isaiah. Hallelujah. So I'll pause recording.
Peter wanted